The kettle was already cold by the time I remembered I'd turned it on. That's the thing about night shifts. Time gets soft. You stop measuring it in hours and start measuring it in small disasters. A kettle gone cold, a blood pressure cuff that won't stop beeping, a man in room 7 who keeps calling me by his daughter's name, and I've stopped correcting him because, honestly, it makes him calmer, and calm is the whole point. But this story isn't about room 7. This story is about a parking lot, 2 a.m, and a stranger who knocked on the window of my car like he was apologizing for existing. I was eating crackers. That's the honest truth. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift. I had a half-empty sleeve of crackers and a podcast about deep-sea fish, and I was genuinely at peace with the universe. And then, knock, knock. Very soft, very hesitant, on the passenger side window. I looked over. He was maybe 30, maybe a little older, with the kind of face that looks like it's usually very composed and is currently failing at that. He was holding his left arm slightly away from his body, not dramatically, just carefully. The way people hold something that hurts, but they're trying not to admit it. I rolled down the window, crackers still in hand, very professional. He said, "I'm sorry, I saw your scrubs. I think I need help." Now, I want to be clear. There is a version of this story where I say, call 911 and drive away. That is the sensible version. That is the version they probably teach somewhere. But his hands were shaking, and not in a dramatic way, in a quiet way, like he'd been holding something heavy for a long time and just now let go. And I've been in medicine long enough to know the difference between someone performing distress and someone actually in it. I got out of the car. His name was Daniel. He'd been at the hospital visiting someone. His father, he said, very briefly, like the word cost him something. And on the way back to his car, he'd tripped on a curb, caught himself on a concrete barrier, and torn up the inside of his forearm. Not badly, not stitches badly, but it was bleeding in that slow, persistent way that looks worse than it is and still needs attention. He also, he told me, was supposed to give himself an injection that night, a weekly one. He had the medication in a small case in his jacket pocket. He had the syringe. He had done it before, he said, many times. But his hands wouldn't stop shaking, and he'd been sitting in the parking lot for 40 minutes trying to make them stop. I looked at him for a moment. "Okay," I said. "Let's do the arm first." I keep a small kit in my car. Gloves, gauze, antiseptic wipes, tape, a couple of bandages. I'm not a walking emergency room, but I'm also not nothing. I've patched up enough scraped palms and panicked moments to know that a little preparation goes a long way. I cleaned his forearm under the parking lot light, which is, I'll admit, not ideal lighting for anything. But it was enough. The wound was shallow, a long scrape really, with one spot that had bled more than the rest. I pressed clean gauze to it and told him to hold it while I got the tape. He said, "You don't have to do this." I said, "I know." He said, "I really am sorry for knocking on your window." I said, "You already apologized for that." He said, "I know, I'm apologizing again." I looked up at him. He had very dark eyes, and they were doing that thing where someone is trying very hard to seem fine, and the effort of it is the most visible thing about them. I've seen that look in a lot of places. Waiting rooms, hallways, the faces of people who've been strong for other people all day and have nothing left. "Your father," I said. Not a question, really. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. I finished taping the gauze and told him to keep it clean, change the dressing in the morning, watch for any redness spreading beyond the edges of the wound. That would be the sign to actually go inside the hospital and see someone properly. A little localized redness is normal. Warmth, swelling, red lines moving up the arm. That's your body telling you something more is happening, and you listen to it. He nodded. He was paying attention. I liked that about him. Then we got to the injection. He took the case out of his pocket and opened it on the hood of my car. The syringe was pre-filled, which made things simpler. He told me what the medication was, and I nodded. It was a subcutaneous injection, the kind that goes into the fatty tissue just under the skin, not into the muscle. Different technique, different feel. "Where do you usually do it?" I asked. He gestured vaguely at his abdomen. "Here, or the thigh." "Let's do the thigh tonight," I said. "Easier to reach, especially if your hands are still unsteady, and you're wearing shorts, so..." He laughed at that, just a small one, but it changed his face entirely, and I filed that away. Humor is genuinely one of the best tools in a medical setting. Not distraction exactly, more like a reminder that the person in front of you is a whole person, not just a body that needs something done to it. Here is what I told him, and what I'll tell you, because this is the kind of thing that's worth knowing. Subcutaneous injections go into the layer of fat just beneath the skin. The most common sites are the abdomen, staying roughly 2 inches away from the navel, the outer thigh, and the back of the upper arm. The thigh is often the easiest for self-injection because you can see it clearly and reach it without contorting yourself. You pinch the skin lightly. Not hard. You're not trying to grab a handful. You're just lifting the tissue slightly away from the muscle beneath. The needle goes in at roughly a 45-degree angle, though some shorter needles go in at 90 degrees. It depends on the device, and the instructions will tell you. You insert it with a smooth, confident motion, not fast, not slow, deliberate. The thing that makes people hesitate is the anticipation. The brain decides it's going to hurt before the needle even touches skin, and that tension, that bracing, actually makes it worse. A tense muscle is a more sensitive muscle. A relaxed one barely registers the needle at all. I told Daniel to take a breath in, and on the exhale, just let his leg go soft, like he was falling asleep in a chair, that specific kind of heaviness. He did. I watched his thigh relax under my gloved hand. "Good," I said quietly, "just like that." He did it himself. I want to be clear about that. I talked him through it. I held the pinch for him because his hands were still unsteady, but he held the syringe. He pushed the plunger. He did the thing he needed to do. When it was over, he sat very still for a moment. Then, he exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for about an hour. "That was..." he started. "I know," I said. "I've done it 100 times. I know. Tonight it just felt..." "Yeah," I said. "Tonight was a different kind of night." He looked at me then, not the way people look at nurses when they're grateful. That's a specific look, warm but slightly distant, like they're grateful for the category of person, not the specific one. This was more direct than that. He was looking at me like he was actually seeing me. I put my gloves in the little waist bag I keep for exactly this situation, and I snapped it shut and I said, "Go home. Eat something. Sleep." He said, "What if I can't sleep?" I said, "Then eat something twice." He laughed again. And this time, it stayed on his face for a moment,